Thank you all for coming. I'm Summer. I'm the curator here at the museum. Before we get started, everybody please turn off or silence your phones so we don't have any disruptions. Coming up in September, we will have 3 programs to celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month. The first will be on September 3rd. We'll have a special lecture funded by the Florida Humanities entitled Afro-Caribbean Migration to Florida with Magdalena Lamar. Next, on the 17th, we're going to have the opening of our new temporary exhibit entitled The Cuban Connection. It's a juried art exhibit of contemporary Cuban art. And for our 3rd lecture, Dr. Berta Arias will speak about the connection between Fernandina and Cuba. And then we'll go downstairs and have the opening and reception. And then the next day, on the 18th, we'll have Fiesta de Santa Maria at the Farmers Market, which will include Hispanic music, living history, and performances. So we hope to see you at all of these events, and there's flyers about them on the back table if you need the dates. And then for our September brown bag lunch on the 1st, I'm actually going to be the speaker, and my program is called A Fabricated New World, Theodore Debre's Florida Engravings. And then we are going to be participating in Falling for Shrimp on October 1st through the 3rd. Just like Shrimp Fest, we'll have a booth outside the Palace. So come see us for that or sign up to volunteer.
Volunteers, we need volunteers. They want you.
And then if you have an evaluation sheet at your seat, please fill it out and return it to that basket at the back table after the program. So that's it for announcements, but tonight we have Carol Alexander. Carol Alexander is the president and CCO of MaVynee, a cultural resource company, and the curator and volunteer founding director of the American Beach Museum. A love of history and culture has led her to the founding of 2 Florida museums and the reopening of the National Museum of Liberia. So everyone, please welcome Carol.
First, I have to clap for you because Friday night, you all chose to come to hear this boring history presentation. However, I understand how y'all do it, but why? That is just the retirement life, although I see a lot of young people here. I'm sure you're not retired, but the introduction, thank you, Summer, and I thank the Amelia Island Plantation, your wonderful director, Ms. Phyllis, and Jennifer, is it? Yes. And Jennifer and Summer for welcoming me here and also actually helping. And if you have to excuse me, I didn't think I could go through it, but I can't.
That's much better.
It's better?
Yeah.
But otherwise, I am color coordinated. Yes, I am. So, I just wanted to really thank the museum because they have been such a great partner to the American Beach Museum from our existence. They're also one of the places that early on, who I called my Mama MaVynee, when I would come up here years and years and years ago, and she would say, "Baby, come on, we got to go to the jailhouse." For a long time, I really didn't know that this was the Amelia Island. It was just a jailhouse. And even before our museum was created 7 years ago, when I brought my young boys who are now 40s, they thought this was the jailhouse. And I don't even think they even understood what was in here. It was like fascination because they actually came into a jail. So this partnership that we have has been very, very special, and I appreciate it. I appreciate even this invitation. This day has been an interesting day. This week has been an interesting week. Excuse me, it even started. This week has been an interesting week. I lost a friend to COVID, and my oldest grandchild, and I think that she is listening, came down with it earlier this week. And she's in Tampa, and as a grandmother can do. You want to crawl up in her bed with her. It don't matter whether she has what she has. But with technology like today, first night when I heard about it, I put my cell phone next to my bed at 10 o'clock every night. And just like when the baby monitors came out, I didn't have that either because my kids are old also. But I kept that cell phone right next to me. When she moved, I woke up and said, "Baby, are you all right?" When she got up, I was watching her as she breathed in and out. So I just say, this week is hard. There's not one person in this room that has either experienced it or has had someone that has experienced it or made transition. We are in an interesting time. An interesting time. And when I come on this island from Jacksonville, it feels like all of the interesting times that I've ever gone through in my last 40 years, even though I just look a little older. No, 40 years ago, as a young woman, I moved here. And I grew up with a mama here. My mother was in Philadelphia, but I learned to have someone to shepherd me, to help me understand life. Life from its earthly particles. We all come from, as we say, earth to earth and dust to dust. I was taught that. I was taught that spirit will live forever. I was taught that walking the sands of the beach and looking over at the waves, and if you wish a certain thing, it can happen. I was taught that. When the sun comes up on that side of the ocean and it sets on this side of the ocean, that's Africa. That's where I came from. I was taught that. Literally and figuratively, not out of book. I was taught that. If you are still in the nights and the moon is gleaming, and you sit still, looking at the waves come in and come out in the Atlantic Ocean, if you really, really, really listen, you can hear the voices. The voices of the people who were thrown over in the ocean. The voices of the people who were thrown away in the ocean. The voices that are still moving around this ocean. Oh, it was my ancestors that she taught me. She also taught me that no matter where you are, someone will take care of you. If it isn't in this realm, they will be there for you. Now, most of you who have been living here on this island probably have guessed who I'm talking about. You all laugh, and you know. There was that woman that you call here the beach lady. I call her Mama MaVynee. It was the woman that if you've lived here and you were downtown Fernandina and you heard her flip-flops and her sandy feet and her half-halter top and her lapa she had around, it was usually a kente because she was an African woman. A woman that if she knew you, she said, "Hey, baby." Put your hand if you ever have seen her or know her. It was a woman that you knew that there was something special. Most people initially thought it was odd because she had 7 feet of hair, carried one hand with a plastic bag covering her almost 2 feet of nails. That was my mama. It's the same woman that my kids would grow up learning gambling with colored toothpicks. You could always win if you were ending with orange. It's the woman that used to cry and call us from Jacksonville saying, "Baby, you gotta come up here now." Because she found out that an Indian man had 2 centimeters of fingernails longer than hers, and she would be in the Guinness Book of Records. That was my mom. And I readjusted this PowerPoint because today had to go back down into the recess of my spiritual teaching to say, no matter what goes wrong, just be still. I had to believe that coming from Jacksonville at, was it about 4:30 when I called you? Was it about 3:30 when I was crying to you? That I couldn't do this. But it was she who taught us. It was she who taught us. Any of you who shook your head and either knew her or understood what she stood for, as a preservationist, as a historian, as a former opera singer, as the only black environmentalist that anybody claims that they've ever known. She knew every flower, every farm. She cared for the turtles. She would protect them coming out of the beach. If you don't know her, you will know her. So, what are these changing sands that I'm talking about? I could sit and talk to you for 40 minutes about Mama Mav and all of the accomplishments, but then I started thinking about the fact that we are on this island and the sands are constantly changing. And there were people here before you came, and you came, and you came, and any of our forefathers that lived here before us. There were people here on this beautiful island in Northeast Florida, this coastland that was practically kind of isolated, if you will. The land was filled with rich flowers and beautiful turtles and all kinds of living animals. And the people here, the Timucuan people, had created significantly advanced horticulture and elaborate spiritual rituals and extensive trading relationships with neighboring groups. The white sandy dunes, the smell of perfume, flowers from the red bay trees, and the natural food that supported the indigenous people and the animal life made them comforting and nurturing in this homeland. Then came the Europeans. The Europeans began to settle in Northeast Florida in 1564. The French Huguenots arrived first, and then came the Spanish. And excuse me, but I can't see. And please, the spirits protect me from anything. I have nothing. I could not go through the rest of that. Then came the Spanish in 1565. They settled near St. Augustine, and they came up the St. John River and attacking and destroying the Huguenots. Oh, you probably have seen and heard the history right here in this building. This began 2 centuries of Spanish occupation and colonization. Archaeologists estimate that approximately 150,000 Timucuan people lived in this area. And by 1513, they were flourishing. There were villages all the way from here to the north, and all of the sea islands that we now see as beautiful resorts. The Timucuan villages were decimated by war and epidemics, that the population of the Timucuan had declined to 3,230 people. Wow. It was not very long from 1513 to 1689. Then the British came, further reducing the indigenous population. The Timucuan population continued to decline on Amelia Island, and by 1701, it is reported by archaeologists that Native American population had been reduced on Amelia Island itself to less than 200 people. 200 people who have lived BC to then. They had lived on this land. They took care of the land. But question, what happened? The changing sands of their land began. The British introduced agricultural plantations to the area and populated them with enslaved people. Now, they're bringing other people in. Those people began to cultivate the already spiritually rich land previously tilled by the native people. New crops were brought in to cultivate in this rich soil. For almost a century, the British and the Spanish warred each other. And for the control of Northeast Florida, it happened. The American Revolution in Florida returned this land back to the Spanish control with the Treaty of Paris in 1783. Most of the British subjects left the area, resulting in a major population shift and the abandonment of numerous plantations. To address this, the Spanish crown followed the early examples of the British, and they began to make generous land grants to attract new settlers. There was one, Samuel Harrison. Now remember that name for a minute. Samuel Harrison. He was from South Carolina. He settled in the south end of Amelia Island, what is now where you see American Beach. He settled there in 1781 during the British period and received even a Spanish land grant in 1796. He got approximately 730 acres on the south end of the island. The sands began to change again. Amelia Islands, Florida's northernmost coastal sea island, has complex history. The port of Fernandina's most major point of entry, it was for the Atlantic slave trade. For more than a half a century, Africans held in captivity here on Amelia Island plantations like the Harrison plantation produced prize crops and sea island cotton, indigo, and other valuable agricultural products. Even after the importation of the captivity of slavery of African people, it became illegal in 1808. But here, under the Spanish control of Florida that continued in this area, they continued to provide safe harbor in Fernandina for ships carrying that human cargo. When threatened with the interception of ship captains, they just turned and say they won't be penalized. They took the human cargo and they put it in the Atlantic Ocean. They tossed them. They tossed them just like the contraband that they would see our people as. When threatened with interception, they did not scare. They just continued and continued. And then the piracy came. Fernandina celebrates its heritage of piracy and rebellion, but it must not forget that Amelia Island's legacy is also rooted in the stories of African Americans whose stolen lives and labor financed the island and regions of the South and the Southern economy. The sands whisper sacred sounds. That's what the beach lady was hearing on the beach. Fernandina changed when the new railroad came. Oh, the construction of this railroad would link the Gulf Coast areas to the Atlantic Ocean. This yet was an example of enslaved African labor supporting American development. When Florida's Atlantic Railroad formed this railroad from Fernandina to Cedar Key, it was constructed with enslaved Africans who were leased from South Carolina to the company who was building the railroad. They built the roadbed and laid the tracks. The companies also negotiated with plantation owners along the way so that they too could lease some additional slaves to build this railroad. Because the river marshes, the new railroad line could not reach Old Town, so therefore, the newly established town of Fernandina Beach ran along Center Street and from Amelia River to the Atlantic Ocean. Crossing the Amelia River along its present route, the Florida Atlantic Railroad reached Duval County, Jacksonville area in 1858, and then the Gulf and Cedar Keys by 1861. Amelia Island continued investment in the wages of slavery, and that was disrupted by the Civil War. As soon as the federal ships and troops captured Amelia Island in March 1862, it became a haven for more than 1,000 people fleeing slavery. By July 1862, and I probably haven't been moving through all of the slides, by July 1862, there were an estimated 1,500 refugees right here on this island. They were runaway slaves. They were contraband as considered private property. So they became almost like if I took something from you or purchased something from you. I'm contraband. What I got from you was contraband. The new refugees moved in here in this area. It was unsettling to the Fernandina people, and they were mostly women and children. The men, of course, were out fighting in the war. The newly freed enslaved settlers needed food and shelter and clothing. The men were recruited to serve in the colored infantry regiments, which led, of course, they were led by white men. The 4th Infantry Regiment of the U.S. Colored Soldiers was organized right here in July of 1863, here in Fernandina. As the Union forces occupied Fernandina, the Confederates abandoned the land, and they even destroyed part of that railroad in the town. And on January the 16th, 1865, again, January the 16th, 1865, General William T. Sherman, the Union General, he issued the Special Field Order No.15, which confiscated as federal property a strip of coastal land extending 30 miles inland from the Atlantic Ocean and stretching from Charleston, South Carolina, 245 miles south to Jacksonville. The order gave most of the roughly 400 acres to the 18,000 newly emancipated enslaved families and other black people living in the area, dividing it into parcels of not more than 40 acres. Those lands became the basis for the slogan that you've heard, 40 acres and a mule, based on the belief that the ex-slaves throughout the old Confederacy would be given the confiscated land that the Union was taking to these ex-slaves, and then a mule from the military to help them in their new life. The orders were intended to address the immediate problem of dealing with tens of thousands of black refugees. General Sherman issued this order 4 days after meeting 20 local black ministers and lay leaders with his U.S. Secretary of War, Edwin M. Stanton, in Savannah, Georgia. They were there, and then they came out and they read this order. Within 6 months, the people who had been enslaved were living on this allocated 400,000 acres of coastal land. They used their skills and labor to make the land productive. Oh, they knew how to do that. They also set up their own civic and educational institutions. They eventually established their own militia to protect themselves from the Klan. However, after Vice President Andrew Johnson assumed the presidency, after Lincoln's assassination in April of 1865, he issued a proclamation that returned those lands to the Southern owners who took an oath to the Confederates, to the Union government. If they would take that oath, the president would give this land back. But I guess you can assume what happened. Johnson granted amnesty to all of those Confederates and allowed the rebel states to elect their own government. These governments often included ex-Confederate officers, soon enacted black codes, measures that were designed to control and repress the recently freed enslaved people. on March the 20th. Keep telling you, remember these dates, because these are things that are happening in our news today. On May the 20th, 1865, the Emancipation Proclamation. Now, you know Lincoln wrote it initially in 62. Sherman comes here in 65 with the special order, frees the slaves. But May the 20th, 1865, the Emancipation Proclamation was read in Tallahassee, Florida, freeing the Africans, the African enslaved people, freeing the African enslaved people. I say remember that date. 2 months ago, Juneteenth. We learned about, if you've never heard about Juneteenth, you learned it became a federal holiday. That day, June 19th, 1865, was the day that the African people who were enslaved in the United States, but were in the state of Texas, finally heard that they were free. Finally heard that they were free. But African people in different parts of this country heard it at different times. We heard it here, May the 20th. Just want to, so that we don't take history and make it real? No, there are different definitions of time. We probably can call that Emancipation Day if there's anything, but not Juneteenth. That's just my commentary. During the Union occupation of Fernandina, there was a majority of black folk here in this city. Remember those Africans who ran across that bridge and came here? They were a majority. And in 1865, this town held the first municipal election in Florida with universal suffrage. Wow, we were allowed to vote. However, you and I couldn't, because I didn't see no women that they had there. I'm sorry, I have these side commentaries. The area grew after the war here in Fernandina. New businesses and schools and newspapers. It was a hotel, and Fernandina was created as a place to be, a place to come. But May 1865, 151 African Americans and only 9 white people elected a mayor. His name was Adolfo Mott, and other municipal leaders. But let's go back. There's always a bigger leader, President Johnson. He had chosen to pardon the Confederate veterans, but not give any protection to the black rights politically and economically, creating yet another changing sand, the long nightmare of segregation and discrimination. By 1867, Mott had been replaced, hopes lost in the sinking sands. Wait for that story. The southern end of the island had been home to African Americans since 1862, when the Union forces occupied Amelia Island and freed the enslaved people from the plantations. The small African American community in the south part of Amelia Island was populated mostly by ex-slaves from the Harrison plantation. See, you're good students. If you all remember when I said remember his name, now you're seeing how we connect the dots. Most of those ex-slaves came from the Harrison plantation, and this little town became known as Franklintown, all one word. The name originated from an ex-slave. His name was Franklin, middle initial E, last name Town. Now, I haven't found any research to know why he was the one that this Franklintown was named after, but he was named after the town that you may hear a little bit of it now here on American Beach. We still have the church, but Franklintown is where the Amelia Island plantation, now the Omni, used to be, or is. They're settlers of Franklintown, and we have to always speak the names of our ancestors. Gabriel Means, Stephen Drummond, Gilbert Hopkins, Robert Stewart, and their families over the years were involved in the farming and fishing and raising livestock here. Gabriel Means purchased additional land during Reconstruction, paying only $340 for 40 acres of land. Don't you wish you had $340? Where he constructed a 2-story house and established a farm. He later donated some of the property in 1888 for a church and a school in Franklintown. We're calling this now building the sands of time. Reconstruction in the Republic torn apart by the war was difficult, a very difficult process. The first was issued that American leaders had to deal with what to do with those people who they have recently been freed. In this Reconstruction society, what is next? What do we do? In December of '65, the nation ratified the 13th Amendment, a constitutional abolition of slavery. However, ending slavery did not really make people free. W.E.B. Du Bois, quote, "The 4 million people who had suddenly been released from slavery were falling into the category of free persons. They were not political persons. This emancipated multitude has no political status. This emancipated multitude has no political rights. Enfranchisement alone carries with it political rights. And these emancipated millions are no more enfranchised now than when they were slaves." End quote. The choice was whether to attempt to create an interracial democracy based on racial equity. Let me read this again. The choice was whether to attempt to create an interracial democracy based on racial equity. Now here comes the or to find some safe second-class status which would ensure white supremacy, but also provide human rights to the former slaves. Pick A or pick B. The end of the Civil War created many challenges and joys within the African American community. Their lifestyle, it was challenging at times, but there were joys. In a small town in western Florida, Madison, Florida, Robert and Julia Lewis had been given a gleam of light in the birth of their 3rd child, March the 29th, 1865, naming him Abraham Lincoln Lewis. Now, why do you think Julia and Robert did that? Abraham Lincoln Lewis. That is he as a young man. In African thought, a name can shape a person's character, mold their social identity, and even influence their destiny. The meaning attached to a name will determine much about the present and the future of a child and what they should do. Okay, you know, I have this little stage part about me. My name is Carol. It means one who sings joy. I go back. Abraham Lincoln Lewis. His destiny was truly set for leadership. The family moved to Jacksonville in 1876, laying the foundation for a better life in the city of what was called Black opportunity. Life for the Lewises was promising. Work was available and the children were able to attend school. And by the age of 13, Abraham Lincoln Lewis began to work in a sawmill, and by the age of 19 years old, he fell in L-O-V-E with a beautiful young woman by the name of Mary Islands. You historians, you love history, let me take you on this trip. Mary Islands, Abraham Lincoln Lewis. Mary Islands is the great granddaughter of Zephaniah and Anta Madigan from the Kingsley plantation. Zephaniah, who married the Sinhalese woman, had many, many children. Zephaniah never had a white woman. He had 3 other women with children. During the time when when things were happening here, he took his family and moved them back to Santo Domingo. The older children stayed here, which were her grandmother. So that is their great granddaughter. I was hoping tonight, they did not come, but I was hoping tonight that his great granddaughter, one of them who is alive, but okay, who is his great granddaughter? Who is his great granddaughter? And the beach lady. So do you see how history on this island connects all the waves of time? So
she was his great granddaughter.
Yes. Oh, you were telling him he was his great grand. Okay. I just thought you were asking a question. After the Civil War, many of the black soldiers who were encamped in Jacksonville decided to remain there. And other black folk would come because Jacksonville, the largest city still, was large then. It was such a promise of labor. All of the waterways were here, and there was all kinds of things happening. The city was building, so a lot of the Union soldiers remained there. The city had a lot of opportunity and promise of jobs, what they called the River City. Educational opportunities for black folks were established. They were able to establish themselves as a political and economic force before they were unceremoniously shut out of the election process. We all don't need to go over what Reconstruction meant. Then in 1888, the yellow fever outbreak came to this area in a vengeance. A lot of people died here on this island. It was so bad in Jacksonville that people actually were trying to escape. People were pushing people just to get on the train to get out. They didn't know what it was. They didn't even realize that a mosquito was bringing it to them. People had all kinds of losses, but no matter what epidemic comes, black folks, like everything else during this time and now, is disenfranchised politically and in the city. There was such a vast decline in health care around the yellow fever outbreak. Many people died. Many black people had no money to care for their ill families and have burial expenses. The churches and benevolent citizens assisted, but the community of La Villa in Jacksonville was hit the hardest. In January of 1901, a Reverend Milton J. Waldron gathered 6 men to his church, Bethel Baptist Church in Jacksonville, to discuss ways to help give their people future assistance in sickness and in death. Due to the unhealthy surroundings and poverty and the absence of adequate relief in times of dire distress, the founding members discussed ways and means to alleviate suffering. They discussed how to give care and treatment to the sick and how to provide for respectable burials for the dead. 7 men chartered on April the 1st, 1901, they chartered the first insurance company of Florida, black or white, in the name, class, grab it, Afro-American Industrial, not yet, it wasn't the insurance, the Afro-American Industrial Benefits Association. Class, oh, I like calling y'all that. Y'all university class. But my point of saying Afro, at that time in 1901, we weren't called black. We were called many other names. We weren't called African, probably colored, but then there are other kinds of titles that were given. But the pride and the knowledge of knowing, because it wasn't like that was being taught in school, they called it Afro-American Industrial and Benefit Association. Oh, you gotta say their names. It was Reverend J. Milton Waldron, Reverend E.J. Gregg, Dr. Arthur Walls Smith, A.W. Price, who became the first president, E.W. Latson, James Franklin Valentine, and A.L. Lewis. He became the treasurer. The 6 men were educated men, either ministers, dentists, doctors, but A.L. Lewis had only gone to about 6th or 7th grade, but he was a very promising businessman. 1 month after the company began, something very devastating. Jacksonville went up in smoke, bringing most of the town, decimating the town, the structures. People were running. But Eartha M.M. White, who was the secretary at the time, she ran to the first building that they began just a month ago to put the Afro-American Industrial and Benefit Association, and she said, I will risk my life for the future of this company. She ran in, grabbed all of the boxes that she could, and ran in the opposite direction of how people were running away from the fire. She cut here and cut there and got to the place where A.L. Lewis and, that picture is gone, A.L. Lewis and his wife were living. She saved the company's files. A.L. Lewis began to manage the company because the other men had to deal with their congregations or their patients or their other constituents. And A.L. Lewis kind of kept the company moving, and they began to grow, and by 1910, the Afro had become, and that was its nickname, the Afro had become so successful that they built a building in Jacksonville on Union Street. By 1919, A.L. Lewis, who had shortened his name, he didn't like Abraham Lincoln, sounded more distinguished to be A.L. Lewis. And there's something about his great-granddaughter, remind me to play with the letters in her name. A.L. Lewis became the president in 1919. 1925, the name of the company changed to the Afro-American Life Insurance Company. And by 1937, the Afro had assets in excess of $1 million. They had begun a pension fund. They were taking care of their employees. They had them to look to the future. When they were no longer working, they had money there. They had a savings fund. So if you put a little money every week and you need something, they had it. A.L. Lewis was enterprising. He began to buy a lot of real estate all over, and believing in Negro business, in 1904, A.L. Lewis assisted Booker T. Washington in establishing the Negro Business League. He also helped found the Negro Insurance Company. He was a longtime member of the Mount Olive AME, that means African Methodist Episcopal Church. Lewis served as a Sunday school superintendent for 54 years. He established the Lincoln Golf and Country Club, because segregation again. If we wanted to play golf, we could not go on the courses. And served as trustee and treasurer for Edward Waters College in Jacksonville, and was a major contributor to the Bethune-Cookman College, founded by his good friend, a former agent of the Afro, Mary McLeod Bethune. Jim Crow and segregation limited opportunities for African Americans. That is the Afro, the one that they built. And these are the Afro-American Industrial and Benefit Association employees. Aren't they some distinguished men? You know, when we were digging out summer, when we were digging out pictures of Georgia. Yeah, I even steal your employees' pictures. So Georgia has been helping me, and we were sitting here looking at the pictures, and I can identify some of the people from the Jacksonville area, and we were matching the people whose descendants still live on American Beach. That's a little sidebar, because Georgia is my friend now. Yeah. So, I lost my point, because I was showing you all these things. And the Bethune-Cookman, so we're here. This is Miss Afro. See, we even had pageants for the Afro man. Wasn't she beautiful? Jim Crow and segregation limited the opportunities for African Americans to take advantage of Florida's extensive beaches. Most of us think about water fountains and buses, but no, even God's sand and water. In 1884, with the establishment of San Pablo Beach, which is now Jacksonville Beach, on the south end of that beach, one day a week, African Americans could go and sun and have fun on the beach. One day. If you missed that day, I guess you gotta wait till next week. Those forbidden sands formed a charter and an ordinance of the city. In 1924, section 103, and I read, I thought I had that. This is the section of this ordinance. It shall be unlawful for any white person or persons, or for Negro persons or persons to bathe together with any white person or persons in the waters of the Atlantic Ocean within the limits of the city of Pablo Beach, within 500 feet. Violators could be punished by 90 days in jail, maybe it would have come here, or $100 fine. There were other beaches for African Americans. Manhattan Beach, that's near Mayport. Flagler had purchased that land and sold it to African American employees that worked for him. Manhattan Beach was wonderful. And then one day in the dark of night, businesses that were developed on that beach were all burned down. There was another black beach, and that was Butler Beach in St. Augustine. Both are non-existent today. During its history, we're back up here, Franklintown was an early destination for African Americans. Churches would come to the area for summer outings. The Afro, under the leadership of A.L. Lewis, sponsored numerous company picnics. The company used Franklintown for its beach outings, and it was the influence of the one who who saved the files, Eartha M.M. White. She had a mother who was born on the Harrison plantation. Her mother would bring her up there, so she was able to tell the company heads that this would be a great place to bring the employees for outings. It probably was that time that President A.L. Lewis conceived the idea to purchase a large tract of the beach here on Amelia Island for developing resort and vacation community homes for African Americans. driven by the desire of, quote, recreation and relaxation without humiliation. A.L. Lewis planned for this Black Beach vacation resort, vacation resort. And it was a way to contradict the Jim Crow laws of the time. The Pension Bureau of the Afro-American Life Insurance purchased the beach property. And it was 216 acres of American beach. Now, it was purchased in 3 separate parcels over 11 years. Now, he named, we don't know, it's not written, but A.L. Lewis was such a very proud man. As you can see, the first millionaire of the state of Florida. We were trying to be not just assimilating, but trying to be partners with people that did not look like us, but we were all here together. He probably said something to himself like, we are as American as anyone else. Let's call this American Beach. The first parcel was purchased in 1935. That was the year of the Great Hurricane. 33 acres with 1,000 feet of ocean front. Also remember, this is during the Depression. The second parcel, which had a larger plat of land, was 100 acres, which was purchased in 1936. And the final 83 acres with 1,500 feet of shoreline was granted to the Pension Bureau by the United States government in 1946. A.L. Lewis and some of his friends, one including Mary McLeod Bethune, who was best friends with Eleanor Roosevelt, at that time was talking to her husband about a tract of land that they would like to have after the war. But he died. The next president came in and honored that request. The streets were named after the four of the 7 owners of the Afro, as well as the family of A.L. Lewis. The lots were 50 by 100, and they were sold for $200 on the shoreline and $100 inland. That's how much you paid, right? I know. You've been here a long time if you did. A.L. Lewis and many other homes followed. The first 10 years of the company the company's new property was exclusively private vacation homes, except for the pavilion and company cabins that were built by the Pension Bureau. Now, friends of A.L. Lewis, Ralph and Ada Lee, saw a need for a public accommodation, and they opened a facility called Ocean View Inn that included a restaurant, ballroom, and 21 guest rooms. Their frequent visitor was noted educator and friend Mary McLeod Bethune. The beach attracted thousands of visitors from throughout the South. Many came by bus as a part of a large group excursion, which greatly taxed the limits of public facilities available on the beach. In response, the Pension Bureau opened a fully equipped A.L. Lewis Hotel. Before buildings, you see, we had tents out. People were enjoying themselves. Look at these cars, they're so fabulous. All folks would come for the day, see the smiles and happiness. This is an aerial view of the beach. How did you get up here that fast, Mom? The hotel came and it seemed to kind of change everything. Other businesses started to flourish. There was the El Patio, the Reynolds Salmon Shop, then Evans Rendezvous. Oh, Evans Rendezvous had everyone that you could think of the time as an entertainer that would come here. Cab Calloway, Billy Daniels, Ray Charles, and even folklorists from Eatonville, Zora Neale Hurston. Her first husband was the grandson of one of the founders, Mr. Price. She married Albert Price. We're looking for their certificate because they had a marriage license here in Nassau County. and they honeymooned on American Beach. We had all kinds of history. In September of 1964, by that time, the beach was the hottest place in the Southeast. We were also listed in the Green Book. Do you all know what the Green Book is? Oh yeah, you saw the movie. But we were even listed on the Green Book. Everybody had to come. As far as Philadelphia, where I am from, we heard about American Beach. But in September of 1964, Hurricane Dora caused a widespread property destruction. The beach eroded severely. Some of the property owners were never able to repair or rebuild their homes, just as segregation had given birth to the unique African-American institutions such as the Afro-American Life Insurance Company and the American Beach. Integration also hastened their decline. The passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964, that same year, allowed African Americans to vacation anywhere else. So they weren't coming far to American Beach. Then some of those homes could never be rebuilt. Most of these homes were second homes for people. The 1970s came. American Beach had been struggling. Not as many people as it was used to experiencing on the sands. The company came. They were the Amelia Island Company. And they began to purchase on the property on the south end of Amelia Island. They were giving incentives to people in Franklintown. If you would sell your land, you can get cash. People decided to sell, and some of them moved into American Beach, others moved into Jacksonville. They did save that Franklintown church, and they were able to move the wooden structure on American Beach, and the bell of the church still exists on American Beach. The Amelia Island Plantation began to form itself. The company ended up acquiring road from Lewis Street near A1A. The original undeveloped part of American Beach, which reduced the community to 125 acres, was also purchased by the Amelia Island Company. After the illustrious operatic career that was in Europe by the Beach Lady, MaVynee Betsch moved back to American Beach in the 70s. Of course, you know that she was the great-granddaughter of A.L. Lewis. She returned. First her mother died, and then 6 months later her grandfather died, James H. Lewis. MaVynee stayed, and she would come up to the beach and enjoy the family home, and being the oldest child, she was left with a lot of the family money. As an environmentalist and humanist, she would just give her money to anyone that needed. So she began to just give her money away. She was a preservationist in ways that even I today still do not understand. But she did, and she committed her life to, one, not allowing American Beach to go unknown, two, saying the history of how the people during enslavement, during Reconstruction, during Jim Crow, during times when you could not make a way out of no way. She wanted a history, because even though on this side of understanding history, there was always this side, and that is the joy. The joy to her was people coming together. The joy to her was seeing flowers bloom. The joy to her was watching the waves come in and out. The joy to her was waiting when the whales came down in the fall from the north down to this area, and they would give birth. The joy to her was saving the eggs on the beach when the mama turtles would come in and tell people, baby, don't walk here. The joy to her was anybody, me, you, a turtle, a plant, any living creature was her joy. She would engage you with song. She would engage you with political conversation, environmental knowledge. She knew a little bit about everything. She was not only committed to preserving nature and environment, she also closely monitored the local political issues here and developmental projects which threatened American Beach and any part of Amelia Island. It was MaVynee's persistence and advocacy that led the National Park Service to protect the majestic sand dunes known reverently as Nana. Upon her transition to be with her ancestors, she would tell me what she wanted to do. Now, as I end, I gotta give you some personal stories. First of all, some of it you all know, because if you were a friend of MaVynee's, you know these stories. But she had a very magical number, 5. A.L. Lewis was born in 1865. American Beach was born in 1935. Oh, MaVynee Betsch was born in the Great Hurricane of 1935. Oh, she could go on and on. The Voting Rights Act was 1965. Anything with 5, she would make you believe it had magic. She would tell me, when I make transition, it will be with a 5. All right, Mama, okay. She would tell my sons that 5 is the magic number. After all, Abraham Lincoln Lewis, he was a millionaire. He would get in his pocket and he would give people $5 bills. Why? What does a $5 bill have on it? Abraham Lincoln. MaVynee was so political that she was born MaVynee Elizabeth Betsch. Her opera career, she was MaVynee Elizabeth Betsch. She sang Salome, Madame Butterfly all through Europe. She had such a high soprano voice. She came back here, and in the 80s, the politics of Ronald Reagan were so... She hated Ronald Reagan so much that she took the R out of her name, making it a political statement. She went from MaVynee to MaVynee. Oh, I don't want nothing to do with the Queen Elizabeth. Those British tore up Amelia Island, so Oshun, the Yoruba name for water on the beach. She became magically MaVynee Oshun Betsch. Nana is the Yoruba name in Africa for the one most high. Some men are also Nana. The president of Ghana now is a Nana in his name. Nana is also Tweet for grandmother. One who protects all. MaVynee would say sometimes, you know, half of Jacksonville was conceived on top of that dude. Oh yes. So MaVynee, because she was an opera singer, opera singers are actresses. Opera singers and actresses not only know how to sing or act, but you have to be able to be captivated by the physicality of she or he. Well, why do you think she would grow 7 feet of hair? Why do you think that every day when you saw her, the story would be different? This part of the hair, sometimes she said it was the flute of the water that came after the whale. I don't know if you know that the right whale, she was named after is called MaVynee, right whale number 1151. Sometimes she would say that this part of her hair that came down really goes from south to north, like the Nile. She had 7 feet of hair that politically made a statement because every single button that she would put on her hair had something that would teach you. Save the earth. Butterflies are necessary for mankind, or whatever was on that button. She prepared my sons and myself and her daughter. Her daughter, that's what they used to call me, the spiritual daughter, her sister, Dr. Janetta Cole, and she brought us down in time when she was ill, and she wrote down specifically what she wanted to have happen on the time that she made transition. Now, anyone so close to the earth would know spiritually that their time isn't long. And I know that she had to, because it was too explicit. I cared for her and my sons until the time when she couldn't care so much, and I began to constantly look at that piece of paper of the instructions, and she would then turn 70 in 2005. So all over this island, if you were living here, you probably either heard of a birthday party or came to one. There was one at the Ritz-Carlton. There was one at Peck High School. There were birthdays every week that she would have. And she said, baby, when I make transition, it will be on 5. She said, baby, I want you to do this. Some of them are personal, but one of the things was her request. I want you to cut my hair. Because, baby, you know that museum we're going to have one day? My hair is going to be in that museum. Katrina came in August. She was weakening here on American Beach, and I was still working. My oldest son had come home. He was still home from college vacation, and my youngest son was in high school on vacation, and I was coming up here every day after work, driving from Jacksonville up here to do whatever I had to do, and then my sons got in place to do that. Katrina came, and MaVynee was just, baby, you see what they did? She had learned about the Corps of Engineers who were supposed to be able to support those vaults and stuff there. The land, not the vaults, the levees. And they didn't do it. There was money there. She was just going crazy. And every time she would come into the city, my kids knew that you don't turn on the television. Oh, she hated that. But we had the television on and it was silent. And she watched the people. She watched the people in Ward 9. It was devastating. And she said, I want to go back to my American Beach. It's time. I want to go back. I'm like, Mom, no, man, you're too weak. I want to go back. So we prepared her and we brought her back up here. I called Janetta and she flew in, and we first got there. And we were taking her back into the house. She said, no, I want to see the people. And this happened to be Labor Day. And at that time, American Beach is usually deserted all kinds of way, but Labor Day, folk come out. So we got a makeshift, I guess you call it gurney, if you will, because we had an emergency van, kind of hospital van thing, kind of bring her out, but they wouldn't walk, so we got her beach chair and wrapped it in sheets, and the boys brought her out to the sand, and people were coming because they knew the beach lady was there. Took her to the beach so she could feel the sand and feel the water. We brought her back in. And on September the 5th, 2005, at 5 a.m., she knew it was time for the waves to take her up into a place where she can talk me out of feeling like I cannot do anything. Tia, who was on the phone when I was crying today. Summer, who I said at 4, I can't do this. Her magic continues to work. Her magic still continues to feel in some of you that I'm feeling, because every time I say her name, you nod because you knew her or you saw her up here. Today, the Amelia Island is shifting. American Beach is changing. The sands are calling for protection. The people are listening. The waves are singing. Who is whispering in the wind? It is the spirits of the ancestors lost and stolen who are building a sandcastle to protect their stories of challenges and triumphs so the grains of sand will not disappear in the wind or in the swell of the ocean. I share my story, my words, and a little bit of history to you. I thank you. Do you have any questions? I took you longer than 45 minutes. Do you have any questions? Thank you so much for listening.
It was wonderful.
Thank you.
What her initials are, what the significance of her initials to her name.
Mark, well, that was the R, not the initials.
Yeah.
They had played with letters. A.L. said he didn't want to be Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah.
He did A.L. and she didn't want to be MaVynee. Took that R out. There are books that you can learn a lot of things. One is a very old, hard to get book. It's called American Beach by Russ Reimer. The other one is An American Beach for African Americans by Marsha Phelps. And the other one is called The Land Was Ours by Andrew Crow. Now this one is about all African American beaches being extinct. Thank you for coming out.